As we've seen with this little past 30 seconds, technology can be complicated. And because of that, what I'm talking about here today is deepfakes. So, at a high level, what we're going to be doing is kind of diving into what are deepfakes, should we be worried about them, what should or could be done, and what should businesses do. Um, and the way I thought about this project is I feel like different people have different levels of understanding of what deepfakes are and kind of what the situation is. So I wanted to kind of give a pretty broad overview of just kind of what's going on. Not too much about the technology, but more the implications, and then some thoughts based off some interviews I've done with people and some thinking I've done about kind of what are the things that people should be thinking about regarding deepfakes. So, as I said, we first need to kind of establish a basic understanding of what deepfakes are. So, the name itself is a kind of a portmanteau of deep learning and fake news. So, machine learning techniques to manipulate existing media. And so the machine learning uses a lot of existing videos, images, and then combining that with the kind of fake news idea. So it's not just let me CGI something, it's I want to use this information to spread disinformation or kind of fake news. And that's where the basic idea comes from. And so a very high level definition would be this is synthetic media files that use existing content to create something new. So again, it takes hundreds, thousands of hours of someone like Obama speaking, and then stitches it together using various machine learning, neural nets, those kinds of techniques to make it look like he's saying something different. And usually you could have a voice making it say that. So it could say, I might not be speaking, and this could be a deep fake of thousands of hours of me talking, and someone impersonates me. So again, I won't get into the tech idea, but it dates back to around 1997 when some people started doing some research around manipulating media. And then it kind of went a bit dormant for a while. Then 2017 was another big piece of research that led to this kind of faux Obama paper where people took thousands of hours of Obama speaking. And then here you can see there was this kind of famous viral video that went around of Jordan Peele doing a vocal impersonation of Obama with deep fake technology to make it look like Obama was saying something new. And actually, the video itself was a warning about deep fakes and what they could do around kind of the election and just fake news in general. And Hani Farid, who I'll get into a little bit more later, is a leading expert in deep fakes. And one thing he said was that you don't have to fool people all the time for a long period of time. So this isn't that I want to produce a piece of video that you'll believe from now into eternity. It might be something that you might buy into for 24 to 48 hours, just enough to kind of spread disinformation around. A famous example in the kind of news world was there was a headline that the Pope endorsed Donald Trump for president. So that didn't happen, but it was a headline and people saw it, they bought into it just enough that they thought, oh, maybe that's real, and then it was proven wrong, but that information gets out there, and that's one of the big dangers of deepfakes. So we've already seen a number of instances of deepfakes in the wild. Some of the earliest instances were actually in the world of pornography, people taking celebrity faces and putting them in pornographic images. Those were handled pretty quickly by outlets like Google, Reddit, pornography websites, because there was a pretty clear violation of, I'm not sure of the laws, but kind of things like slander, libel, and also just illicit material. So that was handled pretty quickly, but there's a lot of other instances of deepfakes that are still emerging that we're not really sure exactly how to handle. So a pretty famous one was a video of what looked like Speaker Nancy Pelosi slurring her words. This would actually be called a cheap fake, which I'll get into momentarily. But it was a manipulated video, and it rose to prominence where Representative Adam Schiff was saying that federal regulation of deepfakes is worthy of serious consideration. So still in the early stages, but people are seeing these and thinking about what does this mean for elections? We already saw fake news and misinformation playing a big part in the 2016 US election and other elections around the world. How did deepfakes play into that? And actually earlier this year, the Legislative Assembly election in Delhi, India, was the first confirmed instance of deepfakes in a major political election. And that was an interesting example that you can see here on the right. But in that instance, what it's reported, and it's a little bit unclear from the reporting, but it seemed that it might have been a ad agency was directed to produce that video by the candidate themselves to translate it into the candidate speaking in a different language. And so there I might think, oh, well, we're using this technology not for something malicious, but just for translation or something kind of positive, but you're still playing within that misinformation category that could raise some big questions and kind of open the floodgates when you think about using these in elections. So as I mentioned, cheap fakes. Now, I want to kind of give a level set about deepfakes and cheap fakes and kind of what this means for the conversation we're having. So here is a spectrum produced by this great research paper on deepfakes. And the kind of overall takeaway here is that there's a variety of technologies that can be used to produce these kind of misinformation pieces of content, but they all fall into that misinformation. So on the far left, you have deepfakes. So that's what I talked about of a video of Obama saying something that he isn't actually saying. There's a really good voice actor pretending to be him. Uses a variety of technologies to make it seem very, very real. And then on the far other end, you have basic photo editing. You might have, one example here, Snapchat filters. No one believing that you actually have a rainbow coming out of your mouth, but that falls into the category of manipulated media. Another one that we saw a little while ago was a video of Jim Acosta, a reporter for our CNN, appearing to almost punch someone in a White House press briefing. That didn't happen, but it was a manipulated media of him speeding up, and it looked almost like that. So again, there's kind of a range, but what's important to realize is, on the one hand, there is a difference. On the other hand, what we're talking about here is manipulated media and misinformation, what those implications are. So while the technical conversation is important, especially for certain groups to have, what we want to be thinking about and what businesses want to be thinking about is kind of where does this fall in terms of misinformation and how can that be used potentially maliciously. So I talked about a couple examples of what we're seeing already, but there's a lot of other areas where there could be vulnerabilities and areas for concern. So a couple of them would include business distrust and potential stock manipulation. So you can imagine a scenario where there's a deep fake of a CEO saying, don't buy my products, the stock goes down, people trade on that, and that's some sort of insider trading. Now, I will caveat that with saying a lot of trading these days is done by computers with trading algorithms, but I think the overall question about eroding trust in a brand and identity holds, and it can be an issue for businesses that think about kind of their communication strategy. Right now, obviously, we're having this conversation over Zoom because there's a global pandemic going on. So the WHO declared an infodemic around a ton of bad information out there, and how it's hard to sift through what is real, what is not real. And that kind of panic and fear existing could be possible fertile ground for a deepfake campaign. Somebody coming out and saying one thing, just sowing more misinformation and distrust, and that can be really problematic. Another example that came up with a conversation I was having is that it's less maybe a concern of someone like Kim Jong-un and a video of him saying, I've launched a nuclear weapon. You know, we have technology to detect that. But maybe in a smaller country with a less developed media infrastructure, there could be a local tribal leader saying something through a deepfake that gets shared on a WhatsApp, and then people rise up and there's violence out of that. And, you know, that could be debunked, but there's not enough of a media there to say, hey, this isn't real, to shut down really quickly, and that could be problematic. And then this is something I'll get into a little more later, but an erosion of trust in media and information platforms. So Facebook, Twitter, Google, YouTube, and more, there's a general trust that what you're seeing online is true, but if you start to see every other video or every other image is a deep fake, you know, we see a lot of manipulated media online, but this sort of misinformation deepfake, that could kind of erode user interest and trust in these websites, and that could be problematic for them. So as we think about what some of the solutions are, we can start with kind of this regulation or using policies to fight our way out, but that will be difficult. In last October, California actually passed a bill, AB 730, geared towards deepfakes, but it was specific to elections, within 60 days of elections, and only until 2023. Now, other countries like Canada and France already have existing laws around media, not deepfakes, but media around elections. So this is kind of falls into a similar category, but it's not a very powerful law, and it really is just geared towards a very, very minor part of the problem. So another option to think about regulation of deepfakes as part of a broader regulation of big tech. Now, that's a whole other conversation. I personally have a lot of thoughts about that, but if we think about how do we want to regulate deep tech, whatever that is, could deepfakes be a part of that conversation? Now, for their part, Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, and Google, along with other leading media companies, do have policies around deepfakes, but they're mostly geared towards removing after a complaint has been made by a user, and often just labeling something as suspicious. It's very difficult to get it taken down. There's loopholes for things like satire, and it's really, most of these policies, Facebook specifically, is geared towards speech rather than action. So a video of a deepfake of Nancy Pelosi saying something could be labeled as a deepfake under Facebook policy, but a video of Nancy Pelosi burning an American flag, for example, would not be. So that would be allowed to stay up. But this similar kind of conversation about manipulated media and kind of where does that fall on these platforms. So next we can think about technological solutions. Now those are mostly in their infancy, but there's some promise in rethinking what the problem is. So there's a group right now between AWS, Facebook, Microsoft partnership on AI that released a deepfake detection challenge. And that's just a challenge that goes out to everyone, that they're trying to develop technology to detect deepfakes. A lot of people are entering it. You can go online right now, download a data set, try to work on it. But that's a pretty big problem. Right now, about 500 hours of video are uploaded to YouTube every minute. That's just YouTube. So if we think about the whole catalog of potential video that could be used and manipulated, that's a huge, huge issue and a huge technological problem. So another way is to kind of rethink the problem. There's companies like TruePic, with an interesting company I talked to, developing technology around image provenance. So instead of verifying a video after the fact, you would embed some sort of metadata information into the recording itself to prove that it's what it is. So for example, when I record a video, there's some technology embedded in that, and then that goes to maybe a blockchain ledger. And then somebody on the other end, whether that's Google, Facebook, MSNBC, Fox News, they are then detecting that information, reading it very quickly, and saying, okay, this is real video, not something that's been manipulated. So it really shifts the burden of proof from the person receiving the video to the person creating the video. So they can say, this is real video, and this is what I'm saying it is. And that's, TruePic right now is focusing more on images, but they have a roadmap towards videos, and we can see maybe in the future, all cameras have some sort of optionality built in for that. So I would say right now, businesses should be thinking about kind of 4 key areas for how to be thinking about deepfakes. So that's education, communications, pain points, and recordings. So education, like I'm doing right now, educate yourself and your organization. You need to know what deepfakes are possible and what they can do. Just being aware of it, being able to surf the internet and think, oh, maybe that's not what I think it is, that's an important aspect of this. A communication strategy. So a lot of deepfakes is about misinformation. So as a company, really shoring up your communication strategy and public persona. If people know your CEO to say A, a deepfake shows them saying not A, so hopefully the public will be quicker to say, okay, that's probably not right. I know they don't say that. And that's just kind of more of an element of that education and awareness. Another thing is identifying your pain points. So in the parlance of security, this would be identifying your crown jewels. So thinking about what speakers, types of information, forums could be most damaged by deepfakes. So could that be a public appearance, internal video content, social media? Just having a sense of where is content existing? Where might that reach a lot of people? Where do I need to be really aware of monitoring all those channels to be careful of that? And then another kind of brute force, but a useful step would be maintaining recordings of everything that your executives are saying. So that if a deepfake is released, you can say immediately, no, here's the real video, here's the imagery. We want to get out there, and there's no question of, well, is this real? We don't have any video to prove it otherwise. And then lastly, I mentioned that maybe there's an opportunity for disruption. So this is Hani Farid, who's kind of the leader in thinking about deepfakes. He's a professor at UC Berkeley. And he said to me when I was speaking with him that, YouTube, Facebook platforms are kind of built on this model of uploading content, people engaging with that content, but that business model, the advertising model might be at odds with kind of how we think about what we want from technology. And so what he said was the time has come for someone to come in and build a better social media and better business model. If everything you're seeing on social media might be fake, kind of what can you really trust? And then is there another opportunity for someone to come in and build a social network where you can trust what you're seeing? A lot of people have problems with Facebook. Is there enough of a problem if deepfakes continue to grow that people would switch to something else? And that's an interesting idea worth exploring. So again, I think the way I'm thinking about it is it's really about education, understanding what's going on. I think the technology is in its infancy, but also pretty advanced. So people need to be aware that this is going to continue to be a problem, whether it's business, politics, healthcare, entertainment, kind of what that misinformation means and how we should be thinking about it. So that's all I have, and I'd love to hear any questions.
And we'll open the floor up for questions, please.
Matt, how does this connect to, you know, non-media disinformation, whether it's bots or you know, fake news stories? What's the relation? Are the issues identical? Is this different? What's your thoughts on that?
In terms of, when you say bots, you mean bots being used to spread disinformation? Yeah.
So for example, you know, with Facebook, we've had, you know, disinformation that, you know, they've been criticized for allowing disinformation or people spreading poor information, where you can use bots to promulgate, you know, things and show that, you know, there's more interest, or to spread things. And that's a form of sort of the broad disinformation. So as a company, is this sort of, should I group all of these in the same thing? Or do you think if I'm a CEO, or is this in a different category?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think overall it's in the same category, but I would argue that that category shouldn't be kind of bundled up and put aside. You know, I mentioned in terms of thinking about your overall communication strategy. I think more than ever, as deepfakes, misinformation, fake news is out there, people need to be thinking about that from every aspect. So I wouldn't say, hey, we got to think about deepfakes, we got to think about fake news. I would say we have to be aware of misinformation and what's possible. And while it may have used to been a fake headline from a seemingly real news site that was not real, now we're thinking about a fake video that looks very real but isn't. And that could be the CEO, it could be someone low level, you know, a deep fake of an employee at Walmart going on some super, you know, racist, misogynistic tirade, posting on YouTube, oh, Walmart employees hate X, Y, Z. And so how do you think about when there's misinformation so easy to put out there through the technology? Because, you know, the Obama Jordan Peele example, for the production company that designed it, it wasn't a super advanced process. It was a combination of, I think, Adobe After Effects and a pretty basic kind of face swapping tool that you can download. So I would say it's really thinking overall about where might we be vulnerable and how does information factor into how we do our business.
We had a question, I think, from Haley.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So I have a question about kind of the inverse of deepfakes. So how do you think about blaming deepfakes for something that someone might have said in real life? So I'm thinking of some politician was recorded saying something really offensive, but because deepfakes are so pervasive, they say, oh no, that wasn't me. And they blame it on kind of the existence of this technology. How do you think about kind of the inverse of that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think two parts of that. I think one is it falls into that kind of true pick technology that I talked about, where you shift the burden from the receiver to the creator. So if MSNBC has some video, they can say, well, no, I have here all the data that tracks back to when this was originally recorded. I know that, I can prove that. You can't do that. So that's one kind of technological aspect. I think another, though, is it goes into this overall question of misinformation. And a lot of that goes on to the Facebooks and the Googles. So the same with headlines. Oh, no, I never said that. That was written in a news story. I don't believe you, whatever it is. If there's this kind of overall climate of distrust, and if Facebook, Google, YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, Snapchat, whatever, aren't very vigilant in policing that and having clear standards for when they do take down information, when they don't, it's just going to feed into that. And people will be quick to say, oh yeah, maybe they didn't say that. You know, I'm not that old, but I'm trying to think of, you know, maybe in the 70s and 80s, if someone said something in the newspaper, we were quoted as saying something, was it often that a politician would say, I never said that? I don't know, but now it's easier to say that, right? Because there is all this fake, oh, easy. I mean, people will say. As this continues to grow, here's another level of potential areas for distrust, or I said, or an excuse for, no, I never said that. And I think that's definitely a big issue that falls into the overall conversation of what is misinformation, kind of how do we tackle this and think about this from a technological standpoint, a regulation standpoint, and kind of a societal standpoint.
Great. Thanks, Patrick.
Matt, a lot of the tools and tech that are used to create deepfakes, whether it's Adobe After Effects or other kind of like they're very much off the shelf products that are available on the open market. I mean, one of the questions I have is, should those products be regulated or sold in such a way where they're verified to sellers, where it's not just as many copies to as many people as we can sell? Like, is it a way to do that is to verify who you're selling to and to monitor that software upstream, so to speak?
Yeah. No, it's an interesting question. I think so. I mentioned Google has policies on it. Part of their policies actually is they removed any apps from their app store that make it very easy for someone to produce a deepfake. So that's kind of a small step, but they're recognizing that the technology is out there. Now, you think about something like Adobe After Effects. On the one hand, people want to be able to produce kind of original creative content, and it's hard to kind of measure that. And then the other questions are, well, let's say you then, every video produced through your product has some sort of tag saying this is real and this isn't, then you're tracking it. Now that raises a lot of other questions about privacy and security. But I think overall, it's important for companies like Adobe or Apple with iMovie and other technology to be thinking, okay, what can my technology be used for that's malicious and not just editing a bad video, right? Like editing, a murder video, something really terrible, but, manipulating data through the technology, right? And kind of using it in that way. So I do think it's worth a company like an Adobe or an Apple or others, I'm not as familiar with other video editing platforms, to be thoughtful about how could this be used? How can people really take it to the next level and create something really damaging? And then, yes, maybe building in some sort of checks on those types of technologies. And again, that raises a lot of questions about what is satire, what is not, kind of how do we think about this? But yeah, I think that's a great part to consider about this.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Does anybody else have any final thoughts or questions for Matt before we adjourn?
I thought you did a really nice job, Matt. It's a really important issue. And, I think you cleanly laid out kind of the steps that teams and executives should be thinking about to follow from a strategy perspective to kind of counteract against these in a clear and concise kind of way. So, I thought it was really, really helpful.
Great. Yeah, I mean, as I said at the beginning of my presentation and the way I wrote my paper, I can't get into the tech. I don't understand all of it, but I think that there's an opportunity for high-level executives to be thinking, and all executives really, to be thinking about what is this? Do I know what I need to know? And kind of how should I be thinking about from a strategy standpoint, how to deal with this? There's a lot of technology that you can be thinking about too, but right now, what steps can I be taking to tackle this? And I do think education is a big part of it. So I hope that's what this presentation, this paper overall does. So I'm glad that came across.
Do you think that this is something that's owned in the C-suite by, say, the head of corporate communications? Is it owned by the CMO? Is it owned by even, the CFO, which often owns risk management with an organization? Is it a joint effort? Like, how do you see organizations kind of driving this from a ownership perspective?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. As I was doing this research, I thought a lot about cybersecurity. I think there's a lot of parallels. So on the one hand, cybersecurity is everyone's problem in a company. Someone leaves their password on a Post-it note, that could sabotage the entire system. So everyone in the organization needs to be aware of this and be thoughtful of it. But I do think at a certain point, a head of communications in tandem with the director of technology, there's two elements of this. There's the kind of tech element, but also, as I said, the kind of communication strategy. What is our public persona? Do we have a clear brand? I think as someone is thinking about what is our brand, is that clear? Are we communicating that? What are the risks? The risks might be that eroding over time. It might be deepfakes coming in and kind of attacking that. So I think it does, from that standpoint, add another element worth considering. But I think overall, you know, it could be the CFO thinking about what could this do to kind of the value of our company. It could be the chief risk officer thinking about how is this another risk factor we need to be considering. Chief technology officer, you know, it really plays into a lot of people. That's not to say a company to throw at everything and say, we got to figure this out right now, but they should all be aware of it. And I do think that having a point person, depending on what the company is, if it is a chief kind of communications officer, would make a lot of sense to make sure that everyone in the organization is aware of what's going on.
Much, Matt. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And yeah, all right.
Thanks.
Talk soon. Thanks, everybody.
Good job, Matt.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you.